General Hospital will reveal Drew had in his hands a treasure trove of evidence that could ruin Portia, irrefutable proof of her involvement in the scheme to set him up with ketamine. This was exactly what Drew needed to execute his plan for revenge and take control of the power game. He knew that at this point, Portia had no choice but to comply. And he was prepared to push her into a corner, forcing her to do his bidding. Portia, a person known for her intellect and decisiveness, now found herself in a completely disadvantaged position. With the test results she had kept hidden from Heather Weber, Drew knew that she wouldn't be able to easily escape this situation. She wasn't just holding on to evidence that could ruin her career, but it could also put her freedom at risk if it came to light. Drew realized that using this evidence would leave Portia with no other choice but to follow his commands. The evidence Drew had uncovered revealed the truth that Tracy Quartermaine was behind the plot to drug him. Although Portia had not directly participated in the act, she had provided information and assisted Drew in uncovering the mastermind. She was the one who had led Drew closer to the truth about Tracy and the dark scheme surrounding her. Now, Drew not only wanted to expose the truth but also make Portia face the consequences. He believed that Portia wouldn't be able to escape this unscathed. Portia, upon realizing she couldn't fight back against Drew, felt a deep sense of despair. She never anticipated that helping Drew would lead to such dire consequences. From someone who had always taken pride in her career and reputation, Portia now found herself facing a difficult choice. She had been pulled into an inescapable spiral. And whether she wanted to or not, she had no choice but to follow Drew's plan if she didn't want to lose everything. The guilt and regret weighed heavily on her. But Portia knew that if she didn't comply, she would face consequences that she couldn't foresee. Drew understood that in this situation, threats would be his strongest weapon. He was unhesitant in using everything at his disposal to keep Portia under control. Not just the evidence he had, but also promises to destroy everything she had worked for. Drew knew that Portia didn't want to lose her medical career and even less, get entangled in a never-ending legal battle. So, he decided to do whatever it took to force her to follow his demands. Portia had no choice but to continue following Drew's plan, but inside, she was overwhelmed with fear and regret. She understood that continuing to help Drew in this scheme would cost her dearly, not just her career, but potentially her freedom. However, Drew's threats were too great, and she had no other option. She had to walk the path Drew had laid out for her, even though her heart was conflicted. While Portia was cornered, Drew was even more determined. He not only wanted to get back at Tracy, but he also sought to use every opportunity to take down those who had wronged him. Drew's life had become a game of calculation, where everyone around him was just a pawn in his hands. But would Drew realize that this quest for revenge could cost him the most precious things in life, including his humanity and his conscience? Drew had carefully prepared for the press conference, where he would publicly reveal the truth he had uncovered. The lives of Tracy and Portia would be turned upside down after this event, as Drew not only sought revenge on Tracy but also forced Portia to face the truth. He held solid evidence that Tracy had paid Brad to set him up with ketamine. For Drew, this was an opportunity he couldn't pass up to expose Tracy's dark plot and corner Portia into a position where she had no escape. The press conference was held at an upscale hotel, attracting media attention. Drew, with all his confidence and calculation, knew this was the moment to force Portia to admit her involvement in the investigation. Everything had been prepared. And now it was time for everyone to face the truth. Drew didn't just want to expose Tracy, he also intended to make Portia publicly acknowledge her role in the scheme. Drew had meticulously planned to ensure Portia could not escape his control. He demanded that she attend the press conference, where she would have to confirm that Tracy was the one who had set him up. It wasn't just about revealing the truth, but about putting Portia in a position where she had no opportunity to resist or justify herself. All eyes would be on Portia, and there was no way she could refuse. For Drew, this was a crucial step in dismantling Tracy's schemes. He didn't just want to settle a personal score, he also wanted to assert his power and control. Having Portia publicly admit that Tracy had paid Brad to drug him was a calculated move. Drew knew that once Portia confessed, her career would never be the same. As Portia stood beside Drew, admitting the truth would not only lead to severe consequences but would also alter everything she had worked for. Though her heart was filled with turmoil and guilt, Portia knew she had no choice but to comply with Drew's demands. Drew stood there, cold and unfeeling, as he saw everything unfold according to plan. Portia's public confession sealed Tracy's failure. However, for Drew, this was just the beginning. He knew that the plots and betrayals would continue, and this battle was far from over. However, things did not go as smoothly as Drew had anticipated. Just as everything seemed to be falling perfectly into place, Brad suddenly resurfaced and made an unexpected demand for an even larger sum of money. Drew, who had always been a master of control and strategy, was not one to be easily swayed by such demands. He rejected Brad's request with firmness, refusing to cave in to his extortion. This response sent a ripple of shock and anger through Brad, who had been accustomed to getting his way with minimal resistance. Feeling insulted and dismissed, Brad's pride took a massive blow. And it wasn't long before he began plotting his next move. Brad, with his self-serving nature and relentless pursuit of personal gain, could not let Drew's rejection slide. His ego, bruised by Drew's refusal, ignited a fire of vengeance within him. He wasn't one to back down or accept defeat quietly. Instead, he saw this as an opportunity to strike back, not just for the insult, but to seize control of the situation for himself. If Drew thought he could simply brush him off, he was about to learn just how dangerous underestimating Brad could be. Brad knew that in this game, there were no rules, and he had no qualms about using the dirtiest tactics to get what he wanted. In a calculated move that shocked Drew, Brad approached Portia, a woman who had once been an ally, albeit unwillingly. Seeing the potential to use Portia as a pawn, Brad made his pitch. Together, they could take down Drew and reverse the tables in their favor. The proposition was simple but powerful: join forces to destroy Drew, strip him of his power, and ensure that he would not get away with manipulating them any longer. Portia, who had already been cornered by Drew's threats and manipulation, found herself at a crossroads. Though she felt guilty for her past involvement, the idea of taking down Drew, the man who had put her in this position, was too tempting to ignore. With Brad's persuasive words and Portia's desperation, the two began to secretly collaborate, working behind Drew's back to plan their retaliation. Brad, ever the opportunist, made sure to exploit every vulnerability in Drew's strategy. He knew that Drew's overconfidence and arrogance would be his downfall. If Brad could get Portia to turn against him and feed Drew misinformation, they could effectively dismantle everything he had worked for. Brad's methods were as ruthless as they were efficient. He had no moral qualms about using manipulation, blackmail, or deceit to achieve his goals. People around him were mere tools to be used and discarded when they no longer served his purpose. He had no interest in friendships, loyalty, or honor. His focus was singular: his own advancement. Brad had spent years learning how to exploit situations to his advantage, and now, with Drew's refusal to pay him off, he was eager to turn the tables and use his cunning to bring Drew down from the top. Portia, though conflicted, saw the alliance with Brad as her only escape from Drew's vice grip. She had been forced into a corner by Drew's manipulations, and now, she was ready to fight back. Despite her guilt, she knew that siding with Brad was her best chance at survival. In the darkened corners of their alliance, Portia and Brad began to plot their moves carefully, watching for every opportunity to weaken Drew's position and ultimately bring him to his knees. The tension between the three of them grew thicker with every passing day. Drew, unaware of the brewing storm against him, continued to carry out his plans with unshaken confidence. But now, with Brad and Portia working in the shadows, Drew's calculated world began to crack. The perfect control he thought he had over the situation started to slip away. As Brad's relentless pursuit of power, combined with Portia's growing desperation, formed a dangerous alliance that threatened to undo everything Drew had carefully constructed. In the battle for dominance, Brad was once again proving to be the unpredictable force that could not be ignored. His willingness to betray, deceive, and exploit every weakness made him a formidable adversary. Drew, who had believed he was in control, now found himself facing a coalition of his enemies. Each driven by personal motives and each willing to sacrifice anything to destroy him. As the tension between them escalated, the stage was set for an explosive confrontation. And Drew was about to realize that the very people he had underestimated were about to turn the tables in a way he never saw coming. When Brad and Portia joined forces to take down Drew, their motives were far more than just seeking revenge. They wanted to make Drew pay for the betrayal he had inflicted on them. And they weren't going to stop until they had seen him brought down to his knees. The once powerful and calculating Drew, who believed he had everyone under his control, was now blindsided by the very people he had trusted the most. The betrayal that stung the hardest wasn't from his enemies, it was from those closest to him. His own allies had turned against him in the most brutal way possible. Drew, known for his cold, calculating demeanor and masterful ability to manipulate situations in his favor, had never anticipated that Brad, the opportunistic and self-serving individual he had brushed aside, would retaliate. Nor had he expected Portia, the woman who had been pushed into a corner by his threats, to join forces with Brad. As these two former allies conspired against him, Drew found himself in a perilous position. The ruthless betrayal from Portia and Brad was like a punch to the gut, one that Drew never saw coming. He had always prided himself on his ability to control every situation, but now he was facing a double threat that was rapidly spiraling out of control. The once calm and calculated Drew was now forced to confront his vulnerabilities. The very people he had trusted were now working together to strip him of his power and control. Drew realized that the situation was far worse than he had anticipated. As the conspiracy to take him down unfolded, he was forced to make difficult decisions about how to maintain his position and achieve his ultimate goals. He had no choice but to fight back. To find a way to turn the tables before everything he had worked for came crashing down. The pressure mounted, and Drew knew that if he didn't act fast, he would lose everything. Meanwhile, Portia found herself, the more she collaborated with Brad, the more she realized how entangled she was in Drew's world, and how difficult it would be to escape from it. Portia had always prided herself on her independence. But now she was beginning to see that every decision she made had consequences that would affect not only her career but her freedom as well. Portia stood at a crossroads, torn between the two paths laid out before her. On one hand, she could continue to cooperate with Brad and take down Drew, a man who had manipulated her for so long. She could finally free herself from the suffocating hold he had on her. On the other hand, she knew that betraying Drew further would lead to devastating consequences. Not only for her career but for her own sense of self. Drew had always been a dangerous person to cross, and Portia feared that by continuing to betray his trust, she would be making an enemy that she could never fully escape. As she weighed her options, Portia felt the weight of her choices pressing on her. Each decision was more critical than the last. And the consequences of her actions seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. She was trapped in a whirlwind of deceit and manipulation, unable to see a clear way out. No matter which path she chose, there would be no easy escape. If she continued to work with Brad, she risked her future and her peace of mind. But if she turned her back on Brad and sided with Drew again, she would have to face the wrath of both Brad and the man she had already betrayed. Portia realized that every step she took would have profound consequences, and there was no going back. She had already crossed lines she could never uncross. And now she was stuck in a deadly game of cat and mouse, where every move could either secure her freedom or lead to her downfall. Drew, on the other hand, was running out of time. The betrayal from Portia and Brad had caught him off guard, but now he had to act fast to salvage his position. He had always prided himself on his ability to outmaneuver others, but now, with his back against the wall, he was faced with the ultimate test. As the tension between the three of them escalated, the stakes grew higher. Drew could no longer afford to take his position for granted, and Portia found herself questioning the very nature of the alliances she had formed. With Brad's ambition and Drew's cold tactics pushing them all to the brink, the game was about to reach its boiling point. Portia knew that no matter what decision she made, it would be a life-altering one. The weight of her choices pressed down on her, and in the end, she realized that every step forward in this tangled web could either lead to her redemption or to her ultimate destruction. As Drew continued to execute his blackmail plan against Portia, the tension in their relationship reached a boiling point. Portia, once confident in her ability to control her own fate, now found herself trapped in a deadly game of manipulation and deceit. She had never imagined that she would be dragged into such a dangerous web of lies, where every decision she made seemed to be dictated by Drew's cruel demands. Her once clear sense of autonomy was now a distant memory, replaced by an overwhelming feeling of helplessness. What Portia couldn't yet see was that this was only the surface of a much darker and more complex situation. The web of deceit that Drew had woven around her was only the beginning of a series of interconnected schemes involving Brad, each one more dangerous and intricate than the last. As Drew tightened his grip on Portia, Brad, too, was working behind the scenes, plotting his own set of machinations that would further complicate the fragile balance between them all. Drew's manipulations were not just an exercise in control, they were part of a much larger plan designed to strip away every ounce of power and influence from everyone around him, all while maintaining his own dominance. As Drew pushed Portia to comply with his every demand, he couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. But this sense of victory was fleeting, for deep down, he knew that these games were not without consequences. His actions had already alienated Portia, and the brewing storm that was Brad's involvement would soon make his grip slip. Brad, the ever-present opportunist, had been playing his own game since the beginning. His own ambitions were driven by a hunger for power and a thirst for revenge. And he knew that Drew's current strategy was just a temporary victory. Brad saw an opening: Portia, who was now vulnerable and uncertain, and Drew, who was so sure of his control. In Brad's mind, this was the perfect time to strike, to seize the chance to manipulate both Portia and Drew to his advantage. He wanted to turn the tables on Drew and use Portia as a pawn in his own quest for power. While Drew was preoccupied with tightening his control, Brad was quietly orchestrating his next move, setting the stage for a betrayal that would shake their already unstable world. The pressure on Portia continued to mount. With every passing day, she felt more suffocated by Drew's control. His blackmail was not just about the present, it was about her future, her reputation, and her very freedom. Portia realized that she was caught in a downward spiral, one that she couldn't stop on her own. Her involvement with Drew, and now with Brad, had placed her in a precarious position from which there seemed to be no escape. The more she tried to extricate herself from Drew's grasp, the more she found herself entangled in the web of lies that both men had spun. She no longer recognized the woman she had once been, confident, independent, and in control of her own destiny. In this complex and volatile situation, no one was safe from the fallout. Drew's manipulations were starting to unravel as Portia began to question whether she could truly live with the consequences of her actions. And while she was tangled in her own moral dilemmas, Brad was quietly maneuvering in the background, preparing to make his move. His ultimate goal was to pit Drew and Portia against each other, setting them up for a final confrontation that would leave him in the most advantageous position. As the tension escalated, the stakes grew higher. The power struggle between Drew, Portia, and Brad would soon reach its inevitable climax. The secrets and lies that had been festering under the surface would come to light, shattering the fragile alliances that had been formed. With every secret revealed, the consequences would ripple outward, threatening the stability of their world. Drew's control over Portia would become more precarious as he faced not only her growing resistance but also the looming threat of Brad's betrayal. Portia, torn between the conflicting pressures of Drew's demands and Brad's manipulations, found herself caught in the crossfire. Each step she took seemed to lead her further into a maze with no way out. She had no idea just how far the conspiracy would go or how much longer she could endure the mental and emotional strain. All she knew was that with every move, the stakes became more dire. And the consequences of her decisions more irreversible. The intricate web of betrayal, blackmail, and manipulation was rapidly approaching a breaking point. With each new revelation, the stakes grew higher, and the lines between friend and foe became blurred. The next move would determine the fate of all involved, whether they would sink deeper into the abyss of their own making or emerge from the chaos, forever changed by the choices they had made. What was certain was that no one would emerge unscathed, and the explosive outcomes of this high-stakes game would ripple through their lives, leaving destruction in its wake.